item 9A, new business, discussion and direction regarding a safe gun storage ordinance. And I'd like to welcome Police Chief Matt Jenkins for a presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I actually do not have a presentation for you tonight, but I'm here to help answer any questions you have as you have your discussion on this item.
Great, thank you so much. So Councilmember Herod, you had requested a discussion on this item at a prior council meeting, and I'd like to turn it over to you to have the conversation you requested.
Thank you. First of all, I do want to appreciate the piece in our packet, which does make some comparisons about other local ordinances, and I think they deserve our attention. So I appreciate that those were part of the packet for council and the public to review. And initially, this idea came to me from members of the public, and what was compelling about it was that communities very similar to our own have had success passing this ordinance, and that there, I think there's a lot of people in the community who have strong feelings about gun control, and there's not always a good avenue for what to do with them on a local level. There's a lot of discussion that's happening now and will continue to happen on the national level, but I until recently didn't know exactly what we could do locally to acknowledge the problem of gun violence, especially in schools, that has impacted many people from afar and also very personally in our community. And so, seeing that there was something that was both appropriate in terms of scope and vision to a community of our type that would not just send a message about the importance of gun safety, but also provides a tool for really helping to save lives. And that's what I see in the statistics that surround this discussion. And I have them here. I think we're all maybe familiar with them. I can get into that if you want to right now, but that's the gist of why I think we should look at this is that it's something that really, I think, addresses something important on, I hesitate to use the word symbolic, but like I said, it's appropriate to our community in terms of showing that we are paying attention to how people feel about these dangers in our community, but also that it has real impacts and hopefully, will help our police department and help in terms of education, and that's proven out in cities and states that have adopted similar ordinances.
Thank you. Chief Jenkins, I had a question for you regarding whether the city were to move forward with adopting a safe gun storage ordinance. Have you spoken with police chiefs in other jurisdictions who have such an ordinance? Do you believe that this would be a recommended action for the council to move forward with? Do you have concerns about us moving forward with an ordinance of this type for Healdsburg?
So I have spoken with both the St. Helena chief and the Petaluma chief about this in recent weeks. I don't have any concerns if the council were to move forward with adopting such an ordinance.
When you spoke with those chiefs, what type of what did you glean, if anything, from those conversations?
We discussed kind of how they came up in their cities, how they went about adopting them, and which methods they did. In the packet, if you recall, St. Helena chose to go with a civil penalty. Petaluma chose to allow it to still be a criminal violation. And that's just what they felt were best for their cities. So if we looked at it here, my recommendation would probably be starting at the civil level versus making it a criminal infraction or misdemeanor through the city ordinance.
In either of those cities, have they actually cited anyone, or has there been a violation that has yet? I don't know how long Petaluma's has been
Petaluma
in place?
adopted theirs, I believe it was in December.
Oh, okay.
December, January. So it's
Fairly
fairly new. St. Helena wasn't much before that. It was late last year, I believe, is when it was adopted. I'm unaware of any violations in either of those cities at this point.
Okay. Councilmember Edwards?
Yeah, one of the reasons I ran was to make real and lasting changes. And I think that just passing this ordinance isn't going to do that. What I would like to see is a real effort of education. I'd like to see the ordinance go through, civil, I agree with that, but I would like to see us have an annual proclamation of a gun safety week, because we pass this ordinance and somebody moves into town, and how do they know about it? I mean, when you move into a city, do you know the parking regulations? Do you know our cannabis policy? We don't have a welcome letter. If we had a newsletter or something went out to new residents and saying, these are ordinances that are unique to Healdsburg, that would be helpful. If we had a proclamation to where we could possibly have Chief Jenkins do a presentation about gun safety, what does safe storage look like? I mean, if we just say we're going to pass an ordinance for safe gun safety, is that a 10 box that a child or a teenager could pry open? I mean, what really is safe gun storage? And I had a lot of people upset at me because I didn't jump on it, but these were questions I had that we couldn't discuss when we were bringing this up. So I would like to see us have an ordinance that really addresses it instead of just saying, hey, we passed this and we feel good about it. I want to see something that's ongoing, that really can change behavior, really can provide some education on an annual ongoing basis.
Councilmember Mitchell?
Yeah, I just had a couple questions for the chief. I don't own a gun, so I don't know what goes into getting a permit and buying a gun. Is there any education that goes along with that you're aware of?
So there are rules that require a handgun safety course prior to. To be honest, I can't tell you what that looks like. I've never purchased a gun as a non-police officer, and our purchasing process is very different. So I do apologize, I don't have that exact information for you.
Thank you for that. The other question I had is, Councilmember Edwards makes a good point about making sure that we can actually, that we're actually doing something, and you didn't want to say symbolic, so, but it kind of feels a little bit like that because of an enforcement question. How would this get enforced?
It's a very good question. This is one of those ordinances that we would likely find out about a violation after the fact or in conjunction with the investigation of another crime. So after the fact being that we find someone in possession of a firearm and they accessed it, and we learn about that, how they accessed it through the investigation, and we determined that someone was storing it not in compliance with the ordinance. The other way would be that we're already in someone's home investigating another crime, and we happen to see a firearm unsecured in the residence, and it could come as a result of that investigation.
So it would appear that maybe the education piece is the missing link here, that, you know, people buy a gun, they need to know it needs to be stored safely. What does that look like? How do we tell them that?
Agreed. I do fully believe that education is a big piece of this. Making sure gun owners are responsible in how they're storing their guns and firearms, that they know if you were to enact an ordinance, what that looks like here in Healdsburg, what those requirements are. If we do that, it goes a long ways, because we don't want the tragedy to happen. So if we do something to prevent it, and that if that is education that does that, I think that's a good step forward.
Go ahead, Councilmember Harrod.
Thank you. Two things. One, thank you, Councilmember Edwards. I totally agree that, you know, we get a lot of press out if we pass an ordinance like this, and there'd be a big something in the paper and everybody would go, okay. But I would really like to see an ordinance, if we were able to enact one, to be a foundation for ongoing education for sure. I don't know if that gets built into the ordinance or if that just becomes a common sense, you know, habit for the city, or an opportunity that we we welcome and take. I sure hope that we would. I think that is a big important part of it, and I'm sure there's ways that we can make that happen. I wanted to ask you a question. The way I could imagine this being enforced is if somebody, maybe a child comes home and says, I was at so-and-so's house and I saw a gun on the table, and that parent called the police department. Would you have an avenue to investigate, because this is against the law to do that?
Yes and no. So yes, we have an avenue to investigate. We can always make contact call that person up and say, hey, we have information that you may be in violation. What we can't do is go into their house and inspect and investigate to see if it is in compliance. So will we be able to take enforcement action? Likely no, but we can do that education piece of, hey, we have this information that you may be storing it in violation of the ordinance. Here's how you can come into compliance.
Thank you. Yeah. And I mean, I think it just illustrates that there's a lot of ways that an ordinance like this is going, hopefully, and if it passes, it's going to have real results. And it hasn't, for other communities. And that's what's really compelling to me, is that, hopefully in these small ways that we could save maybe just one life. And that would be, a huge victory for this community, I think.
Thank you. Sorry, just one second. I'm curious, I know we've talked previously, at least at our recent goal setting session, about the welcome packet that we're planning on producing for new residents when they come to sign up for setting up their electricity or their gas. And we've talked about having a letter explaining to tenants or landlords what their rights and responsibilities are with respect to those concerns. Would it be possible, if we were to adopt an ordinance, that we have a document presented to new residents that shares, should we have an ordinance, the information?
For a vote. If so directed and we bring it back and it passes, absolutely. If there were direction from the council, that is something on our to-do list as of a couple months ago. It's not done yet, so the opportunity, and of course it could be refined as time goes by. So the opportunity remains. I think we'd want to give some thought to how we structure that to give a good amount of information and a manageable enough amount of information that people really read it and pay attention. But I think that could be done if that were the will of the council. And again, the intent with something like that, we don't know every time somebody moves in necessarily, but we do know a utility account, and that's a pretty good proxy. So that's the thought on how we would put something together and provide it to people when they come to town.
Great, thank you. And then in terms of some of the nuances in other cities' ordinances, one of the things I read about was what's the duration of time in state law to report the loss or theft of a firearm versus what some of these cities are adopting. And I'm curious, so the current state law is you have to report loss or theft within 5 days of the firearm being out of your possession, and
Correct.
in other 48 hours in the ordinance that some folks have adopted. Do people report the loss of a handgun to the Healdsburg Police Department, or a loss of a firearm? Is that something that you typically see?
We'll take a few reports on that each year. And it varies in how long they've known it's been missing. Sometimes it's they come across that they're doing some cleanup and they don't see it anymore. When the last time they saw it could have been weeks, months, years, just depending on the nature. So, but yes, Petaluma did enact a 48-hour requirement from the time it was lost, or reasonably should have known it was lost.
Okay, and Councilmember?
Yeah, and I know that, when I was a rural property owner, I did own a gun, and it wasn't a lot of process to own that weapon. I should say tool. I know that responsible gun owners store their guns responsibly. Is there a packet through the NRA or some other gun organization that defines what that safe storage looks like? Do we know what that cost of safe storage is? And if it is a high cost, maybe we should incorporate some kind of way that if someone can't afford to store it safely, that they can turn that gun into the police department.
So California actually has a legislation in effect that defines what safe storage is, because under current state law, safe storage is required if you have a minor, someone under the age of 18 in your home, or someone who could access it reasonably who would be prohibited from owning a firearm. So there's already a legislation that defines that there. As far as what the cost is, some of the simple gun locks that meet the definition and are on the Department of Justice approved list are in about the $15 to $20 range. Then it obviously goes up from there depending on the storage method and if you're looking at safes and vaults and things like that.
And then would someone, if they could not safely store it, be able to turn that into the police department, that weapon?
Yes, currently we do take weapons for surrender and destruction for any number of reasons as long as they're the lawful owner of it.
Thank you. I think that would be an important part of this ordinance also, to make sure that that's available and known to the public also. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and open it up to public comment. I know there's folks who've been waiting a very long time. Thank you for your patience. Please feel free to approach the podium, and then we'll go over to Zoom after we do in-person comment.
I'm Jim, I'm back. As far as this, if there's a state law already you say there's a state law mandating self-storage, why would Healdsburg need something else to penalize somebody if there's already, can they in the police department in Healdsburg arrest somebody for that, even though Healdsburg did not have a rule with that, the safe storage? Can they enforce, can you enforce?
Sorry, we don't answer questions during public comment, but we
No,
can
I'm just
answer.
making a statement.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just making a statement. If is this ordinance really needed if there's already a state law? I'm just making that statement there. And if people can't afford storage but maybe they fear for their life and need to have a firearm in their house, is there some help with somebody could do that? Or is there some safety classes that could be offered by different organizations that would teach people safe storage and safe handling of firearms? And I don't know if there's any around here or not, because I moved from a different state where we had lots of education. So I'm just bringing up those things. Do we really need another ordinance if there's already a state law that can be enforced?
Thank you. Next speaker. I wanted to ask Chief Jenkins if you could respond to the question regarding what is the difference between what state law currently exists and how that would be enforced versus what some of the other ordinances we've seen communities adopt for safe storage, and what the difference would be.
Yes. So California law as it stands today requires safe storage of firearms when there's children present, or if there's someone in the home or could reasonably access the firearm and they're prohibited from owning or possessing a firearm as a result of a conviction or any number of other things that are there in state law. What a safe storage ordinance would do here is make it a requirement that any gun owner store their firearms safely within the city limits, regardless of those conditions at state level.
Councilmember Edwards.
Yeah, I think that broadens it out, because if somebody doesn't have a child living in the house, doesn't mean that the house can't be broken into. The safe storage would contribute to that. But I want to go back. I heard what people are saying. I've just seen so many times that a first step is taken and that second step is never followed through. So I would like to see us take 2 steps at one time to make sure that we get this to be clear.
Great. Well, I want to thank the members of the public who joined us tonight and Chief Jenkins for providing some input on this issue. And I think the ordinance is as drafted that were in our packet and discussed some of the data that is, it's more than alarming. It's devastating around what is happening in our country, and not just around mass shootings, which is what typically makes headlines, but what's happening with domestic violence in homes, what's happening with suicide. Youth who have access to a gun are so much more likely to unfortunately die by suicide when using a gun, and how much the unsecured firearms lead to other crimes, devastating crimes, and death in our communities and beyond. So I think that, in just reading some of that data, it is truly beyond shocking. And to see that so many of these data points show vast improvement with safe storage. So there is data that supports when you have guns stored safely, the risk of death and mass casualty does go down much faster. And so I would like to see us move forward with adopting a safe storage ordinance and hopefully providing direction to staff to bring back a safe storage ordinance. I think the questions before us, if we should, have consensus to move forward, would be what would the difference of penalty look like? So there are some cities, some jurisdictions who adopt a criminal penalty versus a civil penalty, which would be like a fine. And then if there is a requirement to report a lost or stolen firearm, what that timeframe would be. And I'm not sure. I know that there's a lot of data around stolen guns, like hundreds of thousands of lost and stolen guns in our country. I think it said there was a survey that it said approximately 380,000 guns are stolen from individual gun owners each year. So 380,000 guns, that's more than half the population of Sonoma County that are lost out there in someone else's possession. And then when cities have had these ordinances on the books, the number of guns reported stolen increase, markedly. So I think I agree with you in terms of what you said, that it's not just adopting an ordinance, but it's like, how do you educate? How do you enforce what we have potentially on the books? And I also think having this in conjunction with raising awareness, whether it's during National Gun Violence Prevention Week or month, or doing a gun buyback program as a way to, hopefully move folks who maybe don't feel like they can safely store their firearm, or they have firearms that were gifted or, given to them, that they have a way to surrender them safely in a way that can hopefully help to take unsafe firearms out of the community if people can't manage them safely. Did you want to add something?
Well, I just had a question. Do you think it's wise or possible to wrap up this ongoing education component with the ordinance, or should it be a separate thing? Just sort of a how-to. I think we all agree, or enough of us agree, that we want to look at both of those things, and but I'm not sure that they need to come in the same package or not.
Would it be possible if we were to move forward with asking staff to draft an ordinance that, as part of that next step, we ask for recommendations on what some of those education and awareness raising activities could look like, and that's part of that, the discussion at that future meeting of what maybe other cities have done or what communities have done to really try to raise awareness and kind of take it that first and second step.
No, that's fine with me. Whatever works to get that to happen. And I think probably separating it would be the cleanest and easiest, most productive way to do it. Inevitably, the education component would have to have budget and all these sort of things. So, so absolutely. And it seems to me from the outside that they should be separate, just so we can deal with them, the details separately. But as long as they both happen, right? So, because they are hand in hand.
I think that, yes, they need to be both. And I think that it could be as simply as an annual proclamation, to where when we issue proclamations, we get press coverage on those items. And I think that it doesn't necessarily have to cost. And if staff could come back with ways that we could have that annual component, it's just incredibly important to me that we get that out there.
Yeah, and I don't care how much it costs. This is the most important thing we can do to protect people's life and safety in our community. So if we have to spend money to do it, we spend money on a lot of things that. I'm not saying that for scoring points with the audience, but it feels as though if, we are a fortunate community with great means. And I think the ability to not only put an ordinance on the books, but then to move forward with enforcement and raising awareness and education I think that would be really positive. So I think, do we have consensus? We can look at nodding heads to.
Right. Do we need to have consensus on the penalty component now, or can we, do you want or suggestions on the details? How we should go forward with that?
Councilmember, I obviously will take direction if it is, but what we can do, as you know, your policy, our process involves this first step. When something's requested and bring it back, we can do a little bit more analysis in a staff report that would come back with an ordinance and a recommendation. I think you've heard the seeds of that, but we could do that at that time, and then the council could make adjustments if you so desired.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and I would just like to add that if we do, move forward, if we could also include that the requirement to report a theft or a loss of a firearm within 48 hours as being part of the package of what we receive as something else that we can deliberate on when it comes back.
I agree with that.
And I think if we could look at a low income ability for the city to, or somehow provide a trigger lock, if we're talking $15 for someone who's can demonstrate low income needs, yet they'd still be safety. I think that follows in the price thing. Yeah.
Okay. I think that is I think we're good on this item. Enough direction?
We have direction. I know there's a lot of interest in this item, so we'll do our best to move swiftly. Even though the template is out there, this is an ordinance, which is an amendment to the municipal code. So we want to make sure we run it through our review process a little bit carefully. So I don't believe we have time to get it to you in a condition we would feel good about at your next meeting, but we'll look to do it as reasonably quickly thereafter as we can.
Appreciate that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.